Okay, welcome everybody. We're going to try and do a speed version of what I typically spend about 6 hours doing. And when we do the 6-hour version, I apologize because it's really a 15-week training that we should really be doing. So now we're going to condense the whole thing into about an hour and 3/4. But Rabbi Gedalia and I both felt that both for people who've not been here before, for people who may have watched the videos, and for Chazara, for people who have been here and understand and want a Chazara to get back in the Sugya, it's crucial. Everything else that you're going to hear flows out of these basic Yesodis. Not to have this claw is to misunderstand the Sugya. So this is a crisis Chinuch overview, and I would like to say again, as I said earlier in the earlier session, that we are very cautious about giving specific advice in a public setting, and that should be taken as saying, here's what you have to do. Every circumstance could be different, might be different. We're giving musagim, concepts, hoping that we'll understand them deeper, and therefore when you go home, embrace, work on this, discuss it with your therapist, your rabbanim, people who understand this, and ten nachach misachamoid. So we always start with what is normative childhood development, because the background has to be of why we do what we do and why it works is predicated on an understanding of how should normative childhood development happen. How is it meant to happen? So then we can understand better what went wrong, and then it informs us for what we're meant to do to improve the situation and make it better. Under normal circumstance, there's a mitzvah. It's not addressed very well in the Torah, but it's nevertheless there. The mitzvah of Loso bara l'shevis yitzara. Kadosh Baruch Hu did not create the world. It's a pasuk in Yeshayahu. Did not create the world to be empty. He wanted it full of people. And this premise of full of people, I have rayas for this. The Lamdonim come ask me another time. But there's rayas that he wanted healthy people. He wanted people to be healthy, to fill the world. And that was Ratzon HaBorah. And that means that pre-installation of mitzvahs, prior to us trying to install mitzvahs into our children, there's something more fundamental and important, which is to bring up a healthy child. Someone who is healthy in body and healthy in soul, their spirit mentally, they're happy, they're capable of self-love and capable of loving others. This is the prerequisite that HaKadosh Baruch Hu put in the world, neshamas, hoping that we would bring up a child to be like this. When that's done well, the installation of mitzvahs afterwards becomes relatively easier. And we're going to explain where that goes wrong too. But the premise is that we bring up healthy children. That's the mitzvah of Loso bara l'shevis yitzara. He created the world to be full of healthy people. Another way of looking at that is that there are 3 basic stepping stones for bringing up healthy children. The first step is unconditional love. Unconditional love we describe constantly as whatever they do 0 to 2, and you don't have to say exactly at the second birthday you stop this, but again, it's a musag, that whatever they do, you laugh at it. Whatever destruction they make of your home, however they interrupt your life, you laugh. You laugh and you love. And you embrace your children as it's impossible for them to do anything bad. 0 to 2. That means if your child draws pictures on the freshly painted wall of your salon, of your living room, you take out the camera and you take pictures, smiling, standing next to them, of other. Afterwards, you want to work out who left the marker and make sure the markers are put away so it doesn't happen again. Of course. But the first reaction is a reaction where your neshama reacts to your child with delight and joy and love at whatever they do. If you're rushing to work in the morning and you're feeding your child a bowl of Cheerios in the high chair and they're 18 months old and you hear a noise behind you and you turn to take a look at what's going on behind you, and in that moment your child tips the entire bowl of Cheerios and milk all over you, and you're already late for work, and now you've got to go and change yourself. The first desired reaction is to laugh, is to love, is to take pictures, is to communicate to your child there is nothing you can do that's wrong. This is crucial. Most of us wish we'd known this when we first had children, but we didn't. And the reason it's crucial is because in those first early years, we're installing neural pathways in the brain of a child that informs it about life, that tells it whether it's safe in this world or not. And it learns it from our body language, our facial expression, our tone of voice, in addition to the things that we're actually saying. So when the baby draws on the wall, or spills the Cheerios all over you, or keeps you up at night because they're colicky and they're 6 months old, and they can feel your body language of love and patience and sensitivity, you're installing neural pathways in the brain of a child to say you're unconditionally loved. This is crucial because the hamshech of life depends upon this. It depends upon them engaging whatever we're going to do next in their life, that they embrace that too as unconditional love. So when we move to the next, and by the way, I'm doing this, the speed version. You can read this, by the way, most of this is in the book, but it's certainly in the extended videos on site. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page as before we go through this weekend. So when you do that properly, you come to the second stage that picks up around 2. We don't stop doing unconditional love, we continue. But then we add to unconditional love limit setting. Now, why is it crucial to do the 0 to 2 state properly? Because if we do it well, and their experience with us, especially when they kind of know they've done something that was not appropriate, they did something, so to speak, wrong, and they get that because we clean up and we communicate that to them afterwards about not throwing the Cheerios and not drawing on the wall. We talk to them about things. We teach them about it. But when we do it in a loving way, then when we come to limit setting, which is absolutely crucial for all children's lives, when we come to the stage of limit setting, the neural pathways in the child's brain absorb the limit setting not as punitive, but as an extension of the love that we gave them, that 0 to 2. So they may not like it, because no kids like having limits set upon them. And 2 to somewhere around 13, 14, somewhere around there, we're constantly setting limits on our children about bedtime, about waking up time, about clothing, about laundry, about brushing their teeth, you name it. We're constantly setting limits. Our entire interaction with them is teaching them how to discipline themselves and conduct themselves, so we're always setting limits on their behavior. Limits for play, limits for pleasure, limits for eating, for sleeping, for everything. So when we've done the 0 to 2 successfully, they almost always naturally absorb the limit setting as an extension of the love. And it goes well. Masha'en Kain, when the 0 to 2 was one where they were uncertain, where they were scared, where they didn't know if they were safe, where they heard angry, harsh, loud, angry voices when this writing was done on the wall, And they heard screaming and yelling and complaining about the Cheerios being thrown on the clothing and all the rest of the things kids get up to. When they heard, the first reaction was frustration and anger and disappointment when I'm holding this colicky baby and I can't cope anymore, and I'm yelling to my spouse, come take the baby, I can't handle it, I can't. And they hear this. What we're communicating to them is that life isn't safe. And if you do that, then when it comes to the limit setting, unfortunately they embrace the limit setting as the same pattern of your arbitrary, punitive control of me, instead of as a loving act to help me grow up healthy. They feel it's controlling and they will resist. If it goes well, we did the 0 to 2, we built on that limit setting, then the natural development for most children is they turn to us in their late, middle to upper teenage years, they turn to us for guidance. They want to be guided in how to live in life, how to live a productive life. Their guidance for which yeshiva to go to, which school, which seminary. They want guidance on shidduchim, guidance on parnasa, and it goes on with life because they turn to us as the parents for guidance for their lives, and there's a natural flow. This is how we do the mitzvah of the Shevis Yitzhara. We do it through these 3 steps of unconditional love, limit setting, and guidance. So another way of expressing all that very quickly is through the 4 S's of attachment. Because essentially when we're doing this approach, what we're actually doing is helping them attach themselves to us as parents through the medium of the 4 S's of safe, secure, seen, and soothed. Safety, we have to provide safety for our children, that they feel safe in our home, they're not going to be abused. And the safety plays out in many, many different ways, from physical, verbal, emotional, sexual, spiritual abuse. We have to be careful not to hurt them, that they should feel safe in our home, safe with us if they're going to attach to us properly. Secure, you could, by the way, in the book you can read more about all these things, and there's plenty of other places you can learn more about it. Secure, we have to make our children feel secure in our homes, whereby they feel secure at our Shabbos table, they feel secure about Yontif, that it's not a frightening time, it's not a time when they hear complaints and crying and criticisms and fear and anxiety about making Yontif, but they feel secure. They feel secure about getting clothes in season. Winter, they'll get winter clothes, and in the summer, they'll get summer clothes. And if they're going to camp, they'll know about it. It's not a whole frightening dion of I don't know and I'm not sure, we don't know. We let them, we'll see. We're going to work it out. We're going to take care of you. We have to make our children feel secure in their lives, secure with their marriage of their parents, if possible, that their parents have a loving marriage, or they're in a home that's a loving home. Children need to feel seen. Seen is one of the key issues of this word chinuch, of what it really means, because real chinuch means to a mechanech, he brings out, he externalizes, he extracts from a child, who are they? What's special about you? A melamed installs information in a child. They don't know about what an aleph is and what a kometz is. So a melamed installs that information in their brain in a clever way that they want to learn it, and they now have yediyah in their brain. That's a melamed. He's melamed. He installs information, teaches. A mechanech isn't like that. A mechanech really extracts, like the Pietzetzner in Chovis Talmidim, he talks about the Chanukas Habayis. The Chanukas Habayis is not a time to show off your house. The Chanukas Habayis is a time to dedicate your house for this purpose of bringing up a family, of making a Shabbos and a Yontif, of doing Hachnos Zorchim. The potential that lies in the house, the Chanukas Habayis, is to declare and extract and acknowledge what the potential is that lies in this home. So too, true chinuch is not forcing a child to be a certain way, but it's extracting. That's why it's chanuchana al pi darkai. It can only be al pi darkai, because it's all about him. Who are you? And the job of the mechanech is to pull out from the child what is your uniqueness, what makes you special, and then reflect it back to him in a way that he can work out what his mission is in this world, what his job is to do. That's seen. We have to make sure our children feel seen. And the last one is, this is a mistake. You all noticed it, right? The last one, secure, should say soothed. I have to correct that. The last one is soothed. Soothed means that when they injure themselves, when they get into trouble, when they cause trouble or get into trouble, the first response we have to them is to soothe their pain prior to giving them a whole musadrasha of how you got into it in the first place, and you shouldn't have done it, and what were you thinking, and why did you take the tricycle, and we told you not to without the wheels, or you caused problem with your Rebbe, you got into trouble again, that's you. Before we do all the musa, the first thing we're meant to do is sit them on our lap and make them feel secure. Soothed. I'm sorry, I'm messing up here myself. Make them feel soothed. That we soothe their hurt and their pain. And when we do safe, secure, seen, and soothed, all these 4 S's together, then typically we can expect to create a deep attachment with our children. And that deep attachment, if we do it well, will predict overall, for almost all children, what their future life is going to look like. Because they will want, therefore, naturally, to live a similar life to us, to live a life where they're comfortable in our type of culture, relationship, Torah lifestyle. When we do secure, healthy attachment, it is reasonable to believe that the children will follow in our footsteps. This is how normative chinuch works, always has worked, and my guess is always will work. Why is this important? So in previous generations, discipline was achieved through withdrawing love and showing anger. That's how it was done in days. We grew up with that. That when we wanted to be disciplined and controlled, so our parents withdrew love and they showed an angry face. And somehow that made us shteltzu. It made us behave in a way that was oriented towards our parents' wishes. That's how it worked in days gone by. In today's day and age, that doesn't really work very well anymore. That works for a very small group of children who naturally, I refer to them as the 20%. That small group of children who are naturally will work well with same old-fashioned chinuch. You can withdraw love, show an angry face, and they shteltzu, and tomorrow they love you, and tomorrow it's forgotten because they know you were right. For most children today, that doesn't work anymore. And how we actually do it in this day and age, so that they will cooperate with rules, structure, and discipline, which all children, both at home and at school, desperately need rules, structure, and discipline. We do it with loving kindness. We do it gently. We do it with an apology. We tell them, Shefla, I'm so sorry. Oh, but this is the rules. I feel bad. And when they say, well, I don't want it, and I'm not interested, I'm not going to... I say, I understand. I do understand. Well, I don't care, it's bedtime. Who made up these crazy rules? And you look at them and say, yes, I understand, Shefla, I get it. It is hard, but it's still bedtime. And you don't do the angry face and the withdrawing of love, but we do the firm self-control in a loving way that communicates to our children We love you, we respect you, but we still have rules, structure, and discipline in this home. That's the way we can still do it largely in this generation. Why is this all so important? Because all of that I've said till now is all good unless trauma strikes. The sugya of crisis chinuch, the sugya that brings us here to Kesher Nafshi, is the sugya of trauma. Because there's a kasha everybody asks, everyone. I've heard it in every single conference. I've tried to address it again and again. How come I have people ask me, I have sisters-in-law, brothers-in-law, neighbors and friends who I don't think they're doing such a great act of parenting, and they don't do the things you're saying about the 4 S's, and they seem to yell and scream at their kids all the time, and yet their kids don't go off. They're all one after the other, perfect, staying with the system just fine. How does that work? How's that possible? And the answer, the teretz, klali, to this whole sugya is trauma. Because we, including all of us sitting here, maybe there's 1 or 2 incredibly outstanding human beings, like my wife sitting here, maybe there's 1 or 2. But I can tell you, for the rest of us, we all did, I believe, more or less good enough parenting. What I described right now, none of us did the opposite. None of us got up in the morning to torment our kids and make sure they weren't safe, to make sure they're not secure, to never see them for who they are, to never soothe them. There's no such thing. It's ridiculous. Every one of us did more or less good enough parenting. The problem is that we now realize is in the world we live in, more or less good enough parenting is not good enough when trauma strikes. So the sugya of crisis chinuch is the sugya of us as parents understanding the trauma, avada, halavai, we'd be able to protect them from it and prevent it ever happening in the first place, halavai. But most of us had no clue. No one ever warned us. No one ever told us. We had absolutely zero, and I mean zero, idea of what the trauma was. Most of us to this day, many amongst this group right here, are probably still scratching your head, wondering, trauma? I don't see it. Where is it? It must be there, but I don't know. The sugya of crisis chinuch is about helping children in our world recover from the impact of trauma so that they can repair what's happened to them, hopefully, and return to an embrace of a relationship with the parents. Because in most cases that we know of, when children start rebelling, almost all of us initially do what is dead wrong. Almost all of us are told by well-meaning people who apparently know exactly how to do this, even though they've never had children like this. And they tell us exactly how we have to conduct ourselves, how we have to just say no and just put your foot down and show them the door and tell them to pack their bag and all sorts of stuff, because they don't understand the sugya of trauma. And what we've learned over the years is the entire sugya that we're looking at here is a trauma-informed sugya. It's all about trauma. And what I want to do is quickly go through what that means, the implications of it. But understand this, everything I described about normative chinuch doesn't work. It doesn't work when you do it more or less. If we would do it perfectly, if what I just described, we would all do it perfectly, which is why really the encouragement we got to write the book and put it out there for people to learn, for us to give to our children when they get married, to study it, is in the hope they would understand what to do lechatchila and how to do it properly, so that if trauma strikes, they're basically resilient. They bounce back. They don't go off. They don't go through these terrible struggles. They come to us. We get them the help because of the safe, secure, seen and soothed, because of the type of parenting we offered. And we all lament that we didn't know. But when you do more or less good enough parenting, that is almost always not good enough to create the resilience children need to cope with trauma. And that's the subject we're going to go through. Now understand this. Your therapists and other people will tell you that trauma has to be when you're exposed to death or a near-death, horrifying experience or sexual violence like a rape. So that precludes most of the trauma that our kids go through. This is the DSM in the diagnostic criteria for PTSD. But that's not our sugya. It is sometimes. But for, I would say, the vast majority, if not 90% of our children, it's not this. What we do know is that even the kids who do not have that type of experience will nevertheless fulfill this. And think about your children when you're trying to get them to do something they don't want to do, or stop them doing something they do want to do, and they have a severe psychological reaction, an exposure to internal or external cues that symbolize or resemble an aspect of the original trauma, some sort of external control over them. And they freak out on you, totally freak out, which is the simon that there's PTSD. Anyone who's got a child, you know that periodically you seem to be talking to them or something happens and they completely freak out on you. They go crazy. That's almost always a hallmark of PTSD, which is the consequence of trauma. There are 5 different types of trauma. We're not dealing with the first 4. I just want to deal with the last one, which is complex trauma. And complex trauma doesn't mean it's complicated. Complex trauma simply means that the child has been subject to a myriad of micro-traumas, each one of which on its own would never have thrown them off. But when they experience them again and again and again, day after day, they experience those traumas. Cumulatively, they have the exact same impact on the child as what is traditionally called single event trauma, like a rape or like someone being killed near them in a car crash. That kind of traumatic experience. Complex trauma can cause the exact same reaction cumulatively, even though each individual episode of that trauma would not traumatize them. So what is the trauma? So this is important for us to understand, because if we don't understand this, or at the very least, if we could embrace the chances are this is what's happened to our children, even if at this point we don't know, it hasn't emerged yet. They haven't talked to us. I mentioned in the earlier session that we did that the statute of limitations, for example, on sexual abuse has been got rid of in most states, because it's well known now that sexual abuse can emerge 25, 30, 40 years later. A person, that trauma can come up and emerge where it's been buried for so many years. So a statute of limitations makes absolutely no sense. And that's being recognized in the court system. So what is the trauma? So we're looking at relational, developmental, learning, spiritual, and de facto learning disabilities. Let me mention them quickly. So relational, developmental are to do with growing up, experiencing the lack of safety in one or more of 5 dimensions, where a child experiences physical abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, sexual abuse, or spiritual abuse. I think I have a slide on it later on. They're written down. How is this trauma? What happens that causes the traumatic reaction? So here's those 5 different dimensions of relational and developmental trauma. So physical abuse, bullying, for example, erodes the self-esteem of many children. And we know that bullying that goes on can cause them to disconnect from themselves, home and family and school. The other, emotional, psychological, I'm not going to go through them all to explain how they damage, but I think it's self-evident, how undermining the self-worth of a child, confusing their values, making them feel that they're not appreciated, valued, or loved, when it's happening over years and years of their lives, causes a disconnect inside them to find safety in their lives. The sexual traumas are the ones that we find most frequently. In the research we've done looking at the population of kids who unfortunately have gone off the derech, have strayed onto their own derech, the research seems to indicate that about 80% of those children have experienced sexual trauma in their childhood, unaware, unbeknown to their parents. Most boys experience that trauma as early as primary school, as primary, 5 years old. And of course, none of us knew that or were aware of it, that these little kids are going to school only to be preyed on by older boys playing with their private parts or making these boys play with their private parts. Most of the girls' initiation into sexual abuse occurs around 8, 9, 10, the first time. Usually, for most girls, at the hands of an older brother or young uncle, who's the older brother typically in the age group of 13, 14, 15, with an 8, 9, or 10-year-old little girl. What is the problem with this? So people come to me all the time and say, don't kids experiment? Don't they, this normative part of development? The answer is not. Two kids of the same age who may go to each other and say, show me yours, I'll show you mine, is part of normative childhood development. That happens all over the world. That's not traumatic. But the exploitation of a child who is now aware they have been used in a sexual fashion in our world is utterly destructive. And I'll tell you why. Because all these children who have now become sexualized discover themselves as sexual beings. In our world, all of us desire to bring up our children living, floating through this world in a bubble I'll refer to as Hatznei Leches. That's one of the two bubbles that we live in this world. Think of it maybe as foundations for our lives, principles upon which we live. One of them is Hatznei Leches. Hatznei Leches applies both to boys and girls, perhaps more to the girls than it does to the boys. Nevertheless, it includes a lot of things in life, not just covering of the body, but Hatznei Leches includes things like conduct in public, behaving in a mature way, in a respectable fashion. It includes things like if you're gifted enough with the money to buy a big building for a moisad, that you don't put 50-foot high neon sign with your name on top of the building, flashing on and off. That's not Hatznei Leches. Hatznei Leches, you put a little sign on the side somewhere to encourage other people to give. Hatznei Leches covers a lot of things in our lives. But primarily for children, it covers how they conduct themselves covering their bodies. And they hear about this frequently. Throughout their school careers, especially once they come close to puberty and go through high school, they hear very strong language that is meant very, very well to encourage them to govern their lives within this bubble of Hatznei Leches. And it's something we all want. And halavai, that a child will get through these years and get to the years of shidduchim and become a chassan or kala, and then, right before the chasna, in the last few weeks, we give them classes, chassan and kala classes, in which we teach them how to beautifully, appropriately, maturely, ethically, correctly incorporate into that wonderful bubble of Hatznei Leches sexuality. That's what we do. That is what we want for our children. To bring it in gently and just bring it into that bubble at the right time so it's part of their worldview within the framework of Hatznei Leches now includes this sexual activity. That's what we want. That's how we would all want to bring up our children. Halavai. When a child is abused, sexually exposed, becomes sexually aware, pre this experience later on when they became a chassan and kala, they now create two bubbles. One is hatznei leches, and one is to do with being a sexual person. These children who are sexualized are fully aware of themselves as sexual beings, with absolutely zero possibility ever of any behavior that is appropriate, that could be connected to this new status they've acquired by force, by external force of being a sexual person. In fact, all they ever do is hear language from parents, teachers, rebbeim, and I mean well-meaning language that informs them, because they are sexually aware, that you're a shegetz, you're a goy, you're a piece of scum. They hear the language that teaches them that you're the worst part. You're like a goy. You don't belong here. It makes them feel inside that Lu Yitzuya, anybody would know what I'm aware of, what I'm active with about my body, myself. They would throw me out of school today. They would throw me out of house today. These poor kids have no support for this abuse, and most of them have buried the experience. And even those where we found out about the experience and someone forcefully told them, you're not allowed to do this, it's not appropriate. And they said, okay. And you promise me you'll never do it again. And they say, okay. The trouble is, when the genie is out the bottle, you can't put it back in. When a child becomes aware of themselves sexually, that is not something they can ever, for the rest of their life, turn off. Ever. So they have a choice, a bitter choice. One choice is to act out sexually in order to feel unashamed of what happened to me. And the other option is to bury it so deeply inside myself that I shut myself off from this whole world of sexuality, which for most of them, they pay a bitter, bitter price later on in life when they get married. Either way, they're in trouble. They're in deep trouble. Think of it this way. A young girl grows up in a nice frum erliche home. She goes off to seminary after high school. She comes back, a beautiful young lady. Her parents start handling with shidduchim, and Baruch Hashem, she does a wonderful shidduch. She gets married. 5 months later, and 3 months after the chasna, this young lady comes to her mother, a little shy and embarrassed, and says to her mother, Mommy, I think I'm pregnant. For those of us that have experienced that moment, it's one of the most special moments of life. When you discover and are so happy that your child is able to be pregnant, and there's another door, another einikel. It's just a moment of spectacular joy. It's hard to describe. For some people, it's even more chashuv, more special that moment than even the chasna itself. To know that the doros mevorachim, and they will have a child, and they're capable of it, and there's a hemshech of doros. It's just a magical moment. It's one of the most special moments of life. Now just imagine for a second that this young girl goes through high school, she goes to seminary, and she comes back, and she becomes a kala, and the chasna is 5 months later, and 3 months before the chasna, she comes to her mother and says, Mommy, I think I'm pregnant. It's about the greatest disaster any of us can imagine. The trapdoor to Gehinnom just opened under our feet. No one knows what to do, where to go. We feel like dying. People faint in a moment hearing such a Basura Ra. We have the exact same event. One is 3 months after a calendar date, and one is 3 months before a calendar date. One is the most joyous experience ever could be, and one is Gehinnom of die Welt, Mamish. The world of sexual abuse for our children takes them into that world of Gehinnom where they have no idea how to survive. They hear, and we keep them going to the schools, and we nudge them as their tznius starts falling apart, which is only natural when they've been sexualized. And we keep hacking them about the tznius. And they hear, again, I mean very well-meaning drashas from parents and school faculty describing what a prutza is, describing Kedushas Yisrael, the heiligkeit of Kedushas Yisrael, of how we have to behave and dress, and that everything else is Goyish, das ist für die jene Welt, nicht für unsere Welt. And we describe it passionately, unaware that in front of us sit, in almost every class, about 20% of the class have experienced sexual abuse, 1 in 5. And we're unaware of that. No one knows. This is not the place for it now, but in my deeper trainings, I explain to Mechanchim, who mean so well, how to explain what do you do so you can efshilakaim shneim. We cannot destroy these children and be mechazik the 80%. It's so simple, so incredibly simple. Those that ask me, I teach it to them. And you can save these kids' lives so easily. But instead, they sit and listen, and day after day are hucked about their tznius. And each time it's a micro-trauma, which cumulatively, after years of listening to that, breaks them. Poshet breaks them. We talked about learning spiritual trauma. Learning trauma is another example of complex trauma that's so destructive for so many children. Relatively avoidable. There are no villains here because no one means to do it. No one means to do it. And yet, when we send children into a school with expectations of accomplishment on a level that's above their natural ability, and we do that every single day, what do you think happens to the internal world of such a child? So some of them are truly learning disabled. And we send them to resource rooms to try and tweak them that they should be able to learn better. And I have no idea of the numbers, but I know it's significant, the number of those children who experience that, not as the supportive journey to try and help them be able to learn on some level, but as an affirmation of their inability to be a really authentic from Jew. Because somehow, unfortunately, we've conveyed a message that the authenticity of a Jewish child, your value is connected to your ability to learn. And while learning is the pinnacle, is the culmination of everything, it's what's kept us, the Torah has kept us, Klal Yisrael, alive through all the generations. Without it, we'd be destroyed. Diminish learning, and you take away the continuity of Klal Yisrael, God forbid. But when we have an academic level expectation of all children in the class, of a level where most of them can't naturally learn, we're going to discover learning trauma, the cumulative effect and experience of what it feels like every day to feel like a failure, to feel stupid, to notice the Rebbe and the teacher's excitement and joy at the Kesher or the teretz given by their classmates who have the Kesher or the focus or the learning ability to be able to do it. And the Rebbe and the teacher have such joy in them. And for these children, they know that'll never be me. In our world, two pillars. I always say, if after Lachameh ve'esrim, if anyone will say over my Torahs, I hope they'll say, Omer Rabbi Shimon, al shnei amudim, the life of our children is oimed. On shnei amudim. Hatznei leches v'limud HaTorah. That's the world they live in. That is the world of our children. And if they're either deprived of the Hatznei leches because of sexual abuse, or they're deprived of being considered internally a success in learning because it's too beyond them, they're not really able to do it, those pillars crumble. And when those pillars crumble, their attachment to our world crumbles. That's the trauma. The third example was the de facto learning disabilities. And de facto learning disabilities include the whole slew of problems and issues that children may have that interfere with their ability to be able to learn. Meaning to say, they may not have any diagnosable learning disability, but at the same time, they're Fatsaris kids. They're struggling with home issues. Maybe they were adopted. Maybe their parents are in the throes of a bitter divorce. Maybe an elderly grandparent with Alzheimer's was brought to live in the home and completely disrupted the home life. Who knows? There could be many, many factors why their lives are disrupted and they're not able to have a clear, open mind with which to learn. That's a de facto learning disability. And for our children, when those things strike them, any of these, it is pashut traumatic. Traumatic. And the word trauma, if you could take this home with you, if trauma was a word written in Aramaic, Yiddish, or Hebrew, we'd have to teach it into English. The word trauma means disconnect. That's what the word means, to disconnect. Kadosh Baruch Hu made us in a way that we disconnect from the source of the thing that frightens us, that makes us feel scared, that makes us feel afraid for our lives, even the quality of our lives. Trauma disconnects us. And so kids who've experienced either learning trauma or the de facto learning traumas or sexual trauma, without having perfect attachment at home from their parents, when they've only experienced more or less good enough parenting, it's not strong enough to create the resilience and their lives fall apart. That's what happens to our children. Sorry. I just want to throw in quickly impulse disorder, because it's in your papers there. Because impulse disorder, in our world, just having an impulse disorder will take a child away from their ability. That's a de facto learning disability. Having an impulse, having ADD or ODD, just having an impulse disorder will prevent a child from being able to learn properly. And it ends up with the exact same results, unfortunately for most of those kids, as a kid who's gone through the formal traumas of having learning disabilities and or sexual trauma. So I'm throwing them in here too. So the question is like this. What do we do with impulse disorder kids? Impulse disorder, if you think of it like, let me explain it like this. What is an impulse disorder? So if you watch, I'll show you visually what an impulse disorder is. Everyone's brain is wired in a way that there's cognition, towards threats, and then reaction towards those threats. Cognition means we're aware, the senses tell us, we scan the body and it tells us, like, for example, if you walk out of here to your car and there's a wild dog running at you. So that's cognition. We'd have awareness that there's a threat. Then we have to get reaction. How am I going to react to this threat? In the space between, in the brain, between cognition and reaction, there are a hierarchy, a list of options for how to respond to the threat to self-preserve. That's how healthy people are. The brain provides for this space between cognition and reaction and creates instantly a list of possible responses that we can do to protect ourselves. Which one do we take? We all take the one that's highest on the list for dealing with the problem that at the same time preserves personal dignity. That's the one we take. So for example, in the case of, let's say you come out your house going to the street and there's a wild dog comes running down the street at you. So you have options. You could climb up a lamppost or a stop sign. You could climb on top of the car. You could try and run back in the house and fumble to get in the house. You could fumble with your car keys and try and get in the car. There's all sorts of options. You could attack the dog with your bag. There are many options. The one you'll take is the one that's most efficient for dealing with the problem that best preserves personal dignity. So for a man, it's possible, it's one, for preserving dignity is climbing on top of the car. He may scramble up on top of the car. For a lady, it's less likely she's going to climb on top of the car or climb over a fence. She'll go for the door of the car or the door of the house quicker because it's less dignified for her to climb up on top of the car. We all take off that list, whichever is most efficient, highest on the list, but the one that best preserves personal dignity. This is how healthy people are. Now watch closely. I'm about to show you what an impulse disorder is in the brain. Ready? That is an impulse disorder. In the brain, the child goes directly from cognition to reaction without the space to process. So the reaction to the threat is always incredibly efficient and almost always horrible for personal dignity. So that if someone punches them, they punch back. They don't find another way. If someone insults them, they fight back. They react immediately because they don't have a space. And these poor kids get into enormous amount of trouble because they're constantly being mussed their whole life instead of being treated and taught how to open a space, which is all the treatment of impulse disorder kids, is to open the space. And you only open a space by validating and acknowledging their choice and then open the option. First you validate, because if you don't validate, you have to. I think the battery pack is dying. I don't know, is someone here from the, no. I think the battery pack is dying. Does anyone get the, it's dying. Okay, I will try. It's dying. It's almost dead. Okay. Is any surprise that these, should I just turn it off? Okay. Well, it's definitely dying. So, is there any surprise these children end up traumatized because instead of understanding with them is that they don't have a space, need us to they have choices, doing that with them as if Musa is going to solve the problem. Just give us 1 second here.
Found it there.
Okay. Okay, we're back up. Great. Thank you. Shkoich. Okay, someone found batteries. We're good to go. Okay. 1 second. Is that good? Yeah, we're back. Okay, so is any surprise that these kids get traumatized because their experience is they're always being told that what they're doing is wrong and bad. And in fact, all they're doing is reacting because they have no space. They'll take an efficient way of responding to the problem, but the way that's almost always terrible for personal dignity. So they end up also very, very damaged because what they're hearing every day is Musa, and cumulatively, hearing that Musa day after day and criticism day after day, instead of being really treated and taught how to respond to the fact they have an impulse disorder, they end up traumatized too. So let's understand what's the science behind PTSD. This is crucial. What does it do to their brains? Why is it so difficult for them to respond in a healthy way? This is what we need to understand. If you take a look at this picture, the front part of the brain is called the prefrontal cortex. In the middle, there's this little tiny piece called the amygdala, and that's the piece we're going to deal with. The job of the amygdala, this tiny little piece, full body scan in a healthy, non-traumatized person. Again, hello? I think maybe the batteries were dead ones. I don't know. The job of the amygdala is to scan the body. That means sight, sound, taste, smell, touch. A full body scan to assess, is there something going wrong? Is there something happening near me that's threatening me? And when it recognizes that, you want to change this? I can't do it.
It's not stuck in there.
Hello? Okay. Let's try this again. The job of the amygdala is to scan the body. No. Okay, we'll keep going. It's to scan the body. We must be doing something good. Whenever the sun comes, right? We're doing something good. The job of the amygdala is to scan the body to see if there's any threat coming our way. And Kadosh Baruch Hu wired us that way to make sure that would happen. So what's its purpose? The purpose is to protect us. So when a child reacts, when it's reacting to the experience of being traumatized, its job is to protect. The example given is the bear in the woods example. If a bear, you're on a Cholamoid trip, and you're out there in the park on a blanket in the middle of the park, and you're having a lovely little picnic with your family, and about 100 yards away you see a small, medium-sized bear walk out from the undergrowth. What you're not meant to do is start clearing, like which type of bear is the danger? Which one kills you? The brown or the black? 1 second. Do anyone know? Like, you're not meant to start taking selfies, with the bear in the picture. Oh, isn't it cute? What you're meant to do is instantly be terrified, back off, drop everything, and get in your car. The amygdala facilitates that immediate reaction of self-preservation. In a sense, it's converting a future threat, a previous threat, to a future threat. In other words, it's taking stored information inside us in order to protect us. That's how the job. So what does it do? It has the ability to impair the functioning of the prefrontal cortex, this front part of the brain. The amygdala down in order to make us safe. That's what trauma does. It's scanning, looking for internal or external cues that symbolize, resemble an aspect of the original. And when it happens, it shuts down this front part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. Now, why is that important? Look at the front, the green part. I'm going through this very fast. The front green part, the dark green part, is the executive states. When trauma strikes, down between the executive states, takes us into the emotional, the limbic system. And from there, if the trauma, the fear continues, and we have to really be safe and get away from the thing that's frightening us, it'll take us into the brainstem. It sees danger and disconnects us. Take a look at this, the prefrontal cortex. We're going to use this again tonight. The prefrontal cortex has 9 basic functions. When trauma strikes a person and they have to go out, the brain takes them out of this part of the brain, of the prefrontal cortex. It takes all these 9 functions. It either dials it down or it turns it off, one or the other. Sometimes it can turn it off if the danger is so imminent. Otherwise, it dials it down. It gives you less access to this part of your brain. And take a look at the list. Look what gets shut down when a person's in a trauma state. Empathy, insight, response flexibility, body regulation, morality, intuition, attuned communication, and fear modulation. These are the 9 of the prefrontal cortex. And when trauma state is triggered, this gets shut down so that we don't stay with attuned communication. We don't stay empathetic when we're in danger, but we get out of there. We disconnect. We run from the thing that's frightening us. Now put yourself back for a moment into the world of the sexual abuse child in our community who is now hearing constantly drushes about tznius, about kedushas haguf, when they're fully aware, because of what's happened to them, that they become sexually aware and maybe are sexually active with themselves. Drushes, just the very beginning drasha, let's say about doing up a button, or the length of a skirt, or shmiras enayim or shmiras haguf with a boy, for a child who's already been sexualized, and they hear these messages coming their way, telling them that because you're in this world, you're like a goy gomer. We hate you. We would reject you if we knew. We throw you out. It's horrific experience for them every time we go down the direction of tznius, and the same thing with learning. Every time they're reminded of their inadequacy, their inability to learn, the fact that you must be stupid, that you can't think straight, the internal experience of feeling, I'm not capable of doing this, and it appears to me that to be an authentic Jew, you have to be able to learn on a certain level or you're useless. Those experiences for these children are horrific. And so when they get reminded about their lack of tznius, when they get reminded, we push them to daven and to learn, to do the things that they find so difficult, that make them feel so inadequate, this part of the brain shuts down and makes it impossible for them to attune to us, to understand us, to be empathetic, to have attuned communication about the very problem. Fear modulation, emotional regulation, they freak out. They go offline because to them, they're being triggered. It is an internal, again, let me do the language again. When we talk to a sexual abuse victim about her top button or the tightness of her blouse or the shortness of her skirt, she's having an internal experience, right? She's going crazy. There's an internal cue that reminds her, resembles an aspect of the original trauma. We're drawing attention to her and her body, which she is already aware of, that she's already experimenting with that body in a way that she knows if we would be aware of it, we would reject her and cast her out. So she goes offline. She goes offline to shut all that down. She disconnects, and so do the boys. Take a look at a healthy brain. The prefrontal cortex, the brain on the left, is lit up red. You see it's nice and healthy. That's where the electrical energy ought to be, in the front of the brain. Take a look at the PTSD, the post-traumatic stress disorder, the brain of a traumatized child on the right. You'll see the red is, quote, all over the place. And that's really what they're like. When they're in a state of trauma, we use that in English. We say they're all over the place. They're not focused. They don't seem to be grounded. They're not. They are literally all over the place. And here's another picture of that. This is the top, not the bottom, where the healthy brain on the left is lit up primarily, the prefrontal cortex is red. And take a look at the abused brain, the brain of an abused child on the right. You'll see that the front top is not lit up as heavily as the left, but the bottom is where all the energy seems to be going into the survival part of the brain, into the brain stem. So what's the impact on the brain functioning? We consider PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, as if their brain is being hijacked. We view it as adaptive. That means when they behave in the crazy way they behave, right? We all see them. For example, it seems odd, people tell me, that a sexual abuse victim will act out sexually. How does that make sense? If they've already been abused, why would they abuse themselves more? The answer is it's adaptive. By adapting to behave sexually, a child is denying this terrible thing ever happened to me. In other words, nothing bad happened. The interference, the thing that tells me that a bad thing happened to me is religion. Because without religion, then I can have a boyfriend. So it means when I'm aware that I was sexually abused and became sexually active with myself, the only thing that will make me feel bad is if I want to be religious. So separating from religion, do you understand, is adaptive. It's a way a child adapts in order to survive and not want to kill themselves. And the same thing with learning. There's a child who knows I'm a failure and I can't do it. And every time I get pushed to do it, I just feel like a bigger loser and a failure. The adaptation is to separate from the Torah life, because it's only that life that makes me or requires of me to learn. And if I can just stop doing it, then I don't have to be affirmed that I'm stupid, that I'm a failure, that I'm not part of Klal Yisrael because I can't learn. So I have to separate, and that separation is not a philosophical separation. It's not Shita. Do you understand? It's not something they've done a course on comparative religion and decided to reject it. All that's happening is in order to survive trauma, you adapt. And the adaptation is always to separate from the thing that's causing you the bad feelings, the feelings of worthlessness. That's called adaptation, which we contrast, by the way, in treatment. When eventually we do the treatment with kids like this, surely with the help of parents like you, who come to Kesher Nafshi, who learn crisis Chinuch, who learn how to reconnect with the kids. As we reconnect them, we begin slowly, you can't as a parent do this, but we begin slowly to introduce the notion of adaptive first, always, we compliment them on surviving. You've survived, you did the right thing, your brain took you to the right place, and you survived by adapting. And gently, eventually, with Siyata Dishmaya, we're able to contrast that with the word maladaptive. Because if you keep doing it forever, running away, behaving the way you are, it's going to be hard for you to have a normal life. So slowly but surely, we complement to understand the adaptation, because the adaptation is how they survive, while we eventually orient them towards maladaptation so they can get their lives back. And that's a process that takes time. So when triggered, when you come down, you see the of yours, this girl, this daughter who you were unaware because she's never said it, might have wondered, but you maybe you even asked her and she said absolutely not. And she tells you she was never molested. By the way, almost all kids actually cannot define sexual abuse, which is why almost all kids deny it happened. Because most of them think of it, sexual abuse, like a rape, like something at gunpoint. They don't think of it in terms of what happened to them, and almost all of them, especially the girls, felt on some level they were willing participants. They didn't realize that was already an adaptation. Do you see that? Because they couldn't tell anyone, they were too ashamed, and their brain was already helping them adapt by not screaming and yelling and saying no and allowing it to happen, for which they then blame themselves, and they deny, therefore, sexually abused, because a little part of their brain says, I allowed this, I didn't scream, I didn't yell. But they didn't realize at 9 years old they didn't have that option. It's complicated. But nevertheless, it was adaptive when it happened. So when they're triggered, they go offline to survive. Prefrontal cortex shuts down. And that's when we confront them in front of the door before they walk out the house, explaining to them in no uncertain terms why you cannot walk out the house dressed like that. You need to change your blouse. You need to change your skirt. You can't go with your hair like that, etc., etc. And in that confrontation, they go completely crazy, hysterical crazy. No child turns around to their mother and says to them, wow, Mummy, thank you for writing. I don't know what I was thinking. Gosh, I could have walked out like that. Shem Yerachem. Let me run upstairs and change. Thank you, Mummy, for pointing that out. It never happened. Why? Because the prefrontal cortex is offline. They don't even have the access to it if they would want it. And when a kid comes home, you're learning with him and trying to do homework with him just to help him, and he throws the Gemara across the room and says, I hate this. And you go and give him a speech about throwing Gemaras. He's offline. He's going to have a psychological breakdown. He could punch you. I've seen fathers and sons brawling on the floor because the son threw a Gemara, because he can't do it. And that learning of that Gemara was an affirmation of how stupid and worthless he is to Klal Yisrael. And when he threw the Gemara, I'm not encouraging throwing Gemaras, please. Please do not go home and say, Russell said kids should throw Gemaras, please. But if, Lu Yitzuya, he threw the Gemara, and you went and picked it up and kissed it and put it on a chair and turned to him and said, boy, I certainly understand how painful it must be for you to learn Gemara. Thank you for telling me. Let's not do this anymore. Do you see the difference in crisis chinuch? See, in regular chinuch, I don't have to tell you what to do. But in crisis chinuch, you walk over and you pick it up and you kiss it and you put it on a chair and you look at your son and say, thank you for throwing it. Thank you for teaching me. Your life must be so miserable. We will not do this. I will not do this to you. When triggered, when they go offline, is it reasonable to reason with them? Think about it. Is it reasonable? Who's more unreasonable at that moment? When you're standing in the doorway of your house, fighting with your daughter because she's got a side pony. We've all done that, right? Imagine, halavai. Years later, halavai should have any problem. And we were fighting with the side pony as if her life depends on it. And she was freaking out, screaming and yelling, cursing us. Who's more unreasonable at that moment? We are. We are. In crisis chinuch, you don't bother me ever. This is the best guy on earth, by the way. This guy here, I love. The best guy on earth. Really, give him a big hand. What he does here is hello. Ooh, hello. 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 You can hear me. Okay. So, do you understand? Is it reasonable to reason with them when they're triggered and the whole prefrontal cortex went offline, and then we're trying, and all they're doing is adapting to survive, and what we're trying to do is reason with them, and they're reacting like crazy people. They're doing exactly what they're meant to do: survive. So now try and imagine how cruel it is to tell them to just get over it. So you were traumatized, it happened twice, get over it already. Okay, so you won't learn Gemara, you learn Mishnayos. But if you look at the language of PTSD, the language says you'll have a severe psychological reaction at exposure to internal or external cues that symbolize or resemble an aspect of the original trauma. So if a boy was traumatized through learning, then basically any learning you might do with him could trigger him. Anything could. I'm not saying it will, but anything could. I teach them, I can't do this whole thing now, to what are you meant to do, but just as a dugma, what we do to recover from learning trauma is we focus on success and we completely ignore fail, everything they fail. For example, if you teach a kid, I'll give you two examples of recovery from learning trauma within the framework of crisis chinuch. So with a little child who's already realizing they can't learn, we have little kids who've got learning disabilities or de facto learning disabilities, and they simply can't do it. So as you learn a pasuk chumash with 9 words, and he gets 5 wrong, in regular chinuch, what does any father do when you're doing homework with him and he gets 5 wrong out of 9? You chazer the 5. You gently chazer the 5 till he got all 9 right. Then you do the next pasuk. That's regular chinuch. In crisis chinuch, you look at him and say, "Wow, Shefela, you got 4 right. Moiradik, come, let's do the next pasuk." And you go do the next pasuk. If you do it properly, you create so much safety. The fact you got 5 wrong is irrelevant. You never even mentioned it. You got 4 right. I'm so proud of you. It's gewaldig. And it's amazing when you do it properly that the kid himself then says, "Yeah, but what about the other ones?" And they go back to, no, don't worry about them. You'll get it. Don't worry. You're growing up. Let's do the next pasuk. We don't have to spend so much time on homework. The more you do it, the more the kid wants to go back and learn and be taught. There's so many effective techniques to deal with this. But the one thing you can't do is musa a child who's been traumatized with learning or traumatized sexually, to try and just force them to dress and act sanua, to force them into the world of Kedushas Einayim, to force them away from a smartphone. There's a good example. A boy that was traumatized, sexually traumatized for many years, since primary, and he's now 9, 10, 11, let's say he's 12 years old, and he sneaks after many years of being involved sexually with other boys. And then he gets the smartphone, somehow. He finds one, he buys one, and we have a war with him over that smartphone. We destroy his life. We put him into a risk of sekonos nefashos. Because as bad as any of it is, all we're doing is re-traumatizing him. Because he's already looking at stuff. He's already doing stuff. So our fight with him to get it away from him is teaching him that you're not a bona fide Jew. You're a goy. You're not a Jewish, nice, beautiful, struggling Jewish boy. But you're a goy. That's why we're moisa nefesh to get it away from you. That's what he thinks. And what the evidence has shown us over the years, that is terrible, destructive, gefährlich, without needing any explanation from me, how bad pornography is and destructive to their lives. Destroying a relationship with parents is worse. Because pornography, no one died of pornography. But people die from losing a relationship with parents. One is deadly, one is disgusting. And when kids have been traumatized already and already involved for years with themselves sexually, and you have this war, this stupid war, which you know you lose anyway, over the smartphone, so you just simply trigger your kid. He may need that smartphone adaptively to survive. And by giving it to him, we fight another day. But imagine how cruel it is just to tell a kid like this, just get over it. When the brain triggered, as he is by the amygdala, or she is, will simply take them offline, where there is no possibility of reasoning with them. So what is crisis chinuch for? We talk about 4 out of 6. This is just my feeling. This is not, it could be others. But my feeling is that when your kid is frequently at war with their parents, when they're struggling to stay in school or they're out of school, they stop teaching kosher, stop keeping Shabbos, they do drugs and are sexually active, 4 out of 6 of those, the only possible option on earth for saving your child's life is crisis chinuch. Bis mechuyev. We have to move into crisis chinuch because they're in a potentially life-threatening situation if we don't. This is my mahalach. People say to me often, why don't we do this for all kids? And I leave that up to them. I usually wait when I speak publicly in big groups. So someone at the end says, I hear the drosh is moedik, but why is it only... Someone asked me on the way in, why are we just doing this crisis chinuch? Why isn't this mahalach good for all children? If I would say it, they'd destroy me. But a lot of it makes common sense. We're not abandoning our kids, we're reconnecting with our kids. Remember I said about the Shevis Yitzhar, you'll hear this all the time, that reconnection, that bringing up a child to be healthy and happy. That's what this is all about, reconnecting them to us. And through that reconnection, they have a desire to live, to want to live. And eventually, for many, if not most, will have a desire to return to Yadus, to Torah mitzvahs. To do crisis chinuch properly, I strongly recommend you get Das Torah. Here at Kesher Nafshi, we're extremely careful not to paskin shailas. There are some rabbonim here who can and should paskin shailas. We're giving an overall picture of what it is we're meant to be doing. But you need in your life a Rav. There are some rabbonim here, and I really suggest you seek them out, who can answer these shailas, because they're delicate shailas, because they're about pekuach nefesh. And you need Das Torah, who's familiar with and understands that this sugya is the sugya of Sofi pekuach nefesh. So, for example, when you feher a Rav, I hope that didn't sound disrespectful, when you talk to a Rav about whether he could be your Das Torah, you say to him things like, we have already decided that we're giving the internet to our son because he's been abused for years and he's very orangutan in this. Is there any reason I'll be Torah not to? The question to ask a Rav is, we've decided and we gave our son a smartphone or our daughter because saying no, we'd lose her. The problem is we just got this packet from school about the younger kids saying we have to sign, there's no internet in the house. Rebbe, tell me how to sign that. What should I do? There are many shaylas that we need to conduct ourselves, but we need a Rav who understands that what we've done because of Sofi B'kuch Nefesh, because it's really dangerous not to do it. So what typically happens to the children after trauma strikes? The happiness pleasure paradigm describes exactly their journey, how they go off, and it captures the essence of crisis chinuch. It's all here in this. This is it. Idach pirusho. Everything else I'm going to say fits in this model. This is the happiness pleasure paradigm. Every person, every human being would like to be happy. Happiness is found in the embrace of a long-term, meaningful relationship. That's where happiness is. Everything else is pleasure. You know this, for example, on a Cholamoid trip. When you take your kids to Great Adventure, and you spend a fortune of money at some amusement park, and while they're actually there running from ride to ride, they seem to be happy. But the moment you get them in the car on the way home, everyone's complaining what a miserable time we had. And there was such lining up for hours, and it was so hot, and they got more rides than me, and the food was terrible, and this was bad, and that was bad, and Tati was on the phone the whole time anyway. Like, what's going on here? And the mother is frantically feeding the kids on the back seat of the car so the father won't freak out and whack all of them. Because he's so angry after spending all this money all day for this waste of time. You see, it didn't create happiness. It was pleasure. Whereas if you take your kids to a park away from everybody with a blanket, assuming that bear doesn't walk out of the undergrowth, the one we mentioned earlier. But you go to the park with some balls and skittles, and you go and have fun with your kids in the park, and you play frisbee with your children, and you eat and you spend time interacting with no rides, no games, just you, playing games with your children directly, and eating a nice meal with them. When you go home, you discover everyone's glowing. Because you created happiness. Because happiness is in the embrace of a long-term, meaningful relation. Halavai with the Rabbeinu Shalom. Hatanu gamiti mikol eidunim shecholin motze le'enes miziv hashchina. That's what we're after. Where do we learn that? Through our relationships in this world. We learn how to connect and have long-term, meaningful relationships. So here's what happens to our kids. Unbeknown to us, in almost all cases, some sort of trauma struck our child, whether it was learning trauma, whether it was sexual trauma, but it struck our child unbeknown to us. Typically, the child will adapt, as I said before, to deal with the confusion and pain that's going on inside them. So they're hurting. Think of it this way. They're now aware they're somewhat chutz lemachne. They experience it as if they're really estranged from the school system, their home, their life, because of what they've experienced. They feel separate to us and to our lives and our system. The next thing that happens is their heart hurts. They're in pain. They start suffering with depression and anxiety. Pain hurts. The heart hurts. It's like a hole, what I call a hole in the heart. So what do they do with this hole in the heart? Because they can't, unless you have mishunadik connection with your child, they cannot come and tell you yet what's happened to them. Many of them don't even connect the dots to understand what is happening to them. They simply don't know. So they have a hole in the heart. What do? So they get inappropriate reading material or inappropriate songs that they download somewhere that's edgy, outside our world. Maim genuvim yimtaku. It gives them a geschmack to listen to this stuff. And listening or reading inappropriate material or listening to inappropriate songs that's outside the culture of the home gives them an excitement and a lift. And it temporarily fills the hole in their heart. What happens next? We catch them. We always catch them. We or the school catch them. And when we catch them, because we didn't hear about crisis chinuch, we get angry. We do old-fashioned chinuch. We withdraw love and we show an angry face. We frequently punish them. We get astounded. You're listening to this? This isn't music. Who gave you this music? What are you doing? Or why are you reading this? You got this from the library? Where'd you get this magazine? And we get angry with them. Now, if happiness is found in the embrace of a long-term meaningful relationship, what happens to their happiness level with us when we catch them doing inappropriate things like the watching stuff or listening to music or reading inappropriate material, and we get angry with them? What happens to their feeling of love in their relationship with us? What happens to happiness? It goes down. They feel less happy. When they feel less happy, because they see our disapproval of them, what happens to the hole in the heart? It gets bigger. You with me so far? When it gets bigger, the hole in the heart, now they need to shtup more inappropriate maim genuvim yimtaku. They need more inappropriate music, videos, clips, experiences to fill the hole in the heart that just got bigger because we got angry with them, and so they descend into a lower level of behavior because the hole in the heart got bigger. But no one told them the obvious. We always catch them. And when we catch them, after having given them the drosha 2 weeks ago about the less bad stuff, and now we catch them with worse stuff, prior to knowing Christ's chinuch, how do we react? We freak out. We get angry. We cry. We threaten. We get mad as hell at them. What does that do to their relationship with us? It worsens the relationship. What does that do to their happiness? It diminishes their happiness. What does that do to the hole in the heart? It makes it bigger. And now they need more stuff to fill the hole. So they start drinking. And you find bottles in their room. And they're drinking. And you catch them. You always catch them. We always catch them. And when you find the bottles of alcohol, you totally flip out. Because you didn't come to this drosh yet. This won't happen again. You flip out. You might even hit them. You go in and take all those bottles away from them. You ground them for the next month, as if that means anything. And what happens to their relationship with you when you do that? They hate you. Because they were adapting. All that behavior of that hole in the heart stuff was adaptive to help them survive. They were simply trying to stop the hole of pain they have in their heart with this behavior. And we caught them, got angry with them, and took it from them. So the hole gets bigger. And they start drinking. And when we catch them and yell at them at that, they start drugging. And then they start being sexually active. And then we lose our kids. Do you understand? The happiness-pleasure paradigm describes exactly what happens in the children's lives, that they go off the derech, they distance from us, because they are hurting as I described before, which you now understand, all their behaviors, the negative behaviors they're doing, was purely adaptive. Of course, they don't know that word, and they never saw this drosha, and they wouldn't relate to it if they did. They're not online enough to understand it. But they're adapting. That's all they weren't rebellious. They were adapting to survive because of the early trauma, the learning of the sexual trauma they'd been experiencing. So the hole gets bigger. We catch them and get mad and angry with them, and it drives them off. And I've seen kids within 3 months go from being a Beis Yaakov girl to being on the street with jeans and a tank top and piercings in 3 months through the happiness-pleasure paradigm. They've gone because no one told us, and we kept getting angry, and we kept hearing someone say, "You just got to tell her that's not appropriate. She has to know." Actually, what she has to know is it is appropriate. Shefela, if you're doing this, you need it. You must need it. You see, in crisis chinuch, I want to explain the yisod of crisis chinuch. They're going to stop me in a few minutes. I realize I've never in my life gone through all these slides, so don't panic. It's never happened. I really, honestly, I try to engage myself with your experience of what I'm saying and attune the presentation to you. So it's not about me getting through my slides. It's not relevant, but listen to this. If you want to understand what crisis chinuch is and why we do many of the seemingly crazy things we do, follow me as I reverse the happiness-pleasure paradigm. Your child, unfortunately, because you didn't know this in advance, is now doing drugs, dressing completely outside the framework of Torah mitzvahs, and she has a boyfriend. And she comes down the stairs, and this happens within no time at all. And she comes down the stairs, and she's dressed, from our perspective of tznius, horrendous. Is that an okay word? She's dressed horrendous from the perspective of tznius. Can I say, from the perspective of looking beautiful and seductive, she's top rung. She's done an excellent job of looking seductive and beautiful. Can we say that? Is that okay if I just say that for a moment? Are we with that? And imagine what happens when she sees you look at her with the full expectation of you having a nervous breakdown that second, of you calling Hatzalah, the police, or Shomrim, of you blocking the door. You just bought yourself an Uzi submachine gun so you could stand in front of the door to stop her walking out. She's expecting all that stuff. And instead you go over and give her a hug and say, wow, you look amazing. Now we're doing crisis chinuch. If anyone just opened that other box, please close it again. Did you open that box by accident? Yeah, some of you did, I can see. Close that other box. The regular chinuch box, that doesn't work. That doesn't fit. It doesn't belong. It's treif. Close that box again. Just close it good. In the crisis chinuch box, let's track what happens when you walk over to her and you give her a hug and say, wow, you look amazing. Wow, you're beautiful. What happens in your relationship with your child? How does she feel about you? Well, the first time she's not going to trust you. So she's going to say, get out my way. Or she might even curse you or tell you, I don't care what you think. You think I care what you think? And she'll storm out the house. But let's fast forward to the second or third time when you did it. She's going to say, thanks, Ma. It's like, what's going on here? Thanks. Bye. Then she goes out. What happens the fifth time you say it? The sixth time? She comes over to you and she says, do you think it's too short? And you do not say, you could make that shorter? Like, another word, like, there's nowhere else for it to go. You don't say that. But you say to her, well, it depends what kind of impression you want to give. You know, if you're going out dancing, you look great. It's up to you. And the next time she comes and says, this boy was all over me and it's crazy. You think it's the dress? You think I shouldn't wear this skirt? You say, well, maybe add an inch to it. It might. And so what are you doing every time you reconnect with her? Imagine what would happen if you went out and bought her a stunning cocktail dress, very similar to the one that she was wearing, and you gave it to her after seeing her disappearing from your life, cursing you out, hating you, No connection, no relationship, nothing. The only word she ever speaks to you is curse words, spat in your face. Otherwise, she disappears into a bedroom. And you've started nurturing this, and you go buy her this dress and give it to her, this skimpy, nothing dress, this Hashem Yerachim dress. This dress that in crisis chinuch, in regular chinuch, makes you off the derech. But you went and bought it for her because you knew where she is. And you still haven't worked it out what the trauma is. But you came here and now you know there's trauma if she's dressing this way. And you buy her that dress. What does it do to your relationship with her? It repairs the relationship. Thank you. It repairs the relation. Oh, 5 minutes? I thought you were just agreeing with me. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought he was agreeing with me. 5 minutes. It repairs the relationship. Look, understand this. All of crisis chinuch, everything we're doing, everything we're teaching in Kesher Nafshi falls into this paradigm. When you give her the dress, you tuned into her, you repair the relationship with her. When you repair the relationship, she has a little bit more happiness. When she has a little bit more happiness, the hole in the heart closes ever so little. And then we repeat it and we do it again and again and again while we rebuild our relationship with her. And so starts a process that took 3 months to take her off and could take 7 to 25 years to bring her back. 7 to 25 years or longer. But when we do this, and we reconnect her to us, the chances are she will want to be close to us. And 9 times out of 10, she will want to reorient her life eventually in a way that's consistent with being close to us, because happiness is found in the embrace of a long-term, meaningful relationship. When we exploit her defiance, which is the essence of crisis chinuch. Defy me more than I can love you. Try to defy me more than my capacity to love you. You will fail. And when she fails, the hole in the heart shrinks ever so little. And by the way, you can heal a defiant child more quickly and efficiently through their defiance than through their compliance. When they comply, they're doing it because they feel guilt or pressure. They don't heal. When they defy and we reach out to them with love, attunement, understanding, kindness, tuning into their needs, understanding. For the guys, I'll give you a perfect example with the smartphone. You know when your 14-year-old kid who's off the derech and struggling wants a smartphone, he's getting one. You cannot stop it. And any war to stop it will destroy him. Masha Einken, when you go and get it for him because you understand he needs it, what does that do to your relationship with your child? It repairs the damaged relationship. It slowly brings them closer to you. So they say to me that if I buy her that cocktail dress, aren't I legitimizing the way she dresses? 100% no. The only thing that will legitimize it is if you start dressing that way, which I don't recommend. She knows darn well you don't agree with it. But what she's experiencing is attunement. Is your love and attunement for her that's repairing her relationship with you. The same thing with the smartphone. Well, you think your son believes you think pornography is okay. And you know darn well that's what he's going to go watch. But he's doing it anyway behind your back. Do you know when you do this properly with a boy, crisis chinuch properly, with a boy who's already got his illicit smartphone, because you already found 3 of them under his mattress. Why they put them under the mattress, I have no idea. But they put them on. Do they not realize their mother makes the bed? Like, what are they thinking? It doesn't make any sense. We always find it. So he's doing it anyway. He's got the illicit smartphone somewhere. It's like the boys who go to yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael, with these struggling yeshivas. So they always say, hand in your phone when you get there. Now they learned, okay, hand in the second phone. I told them recently, I know guys who bring 3 or 4 phones. They're like stacked up. So if they say the third phone, oh really, the third one? Fine. They got the 4th one in their back pocket. You can't stop it. So are we condoning pornography when we give the smartphone to the kid? Absolutely not. What we're actually doing is attuning and saying, I understand you need this right now, this stage of your life. But what you're doing is repairing your relationship with your son, where your son feels heard by you. Not for 1 second does he believe that you hold of pornography. Not for 1 second does he believe you hold of open internet. Not true. He knows the truth. But what he's learned is that my father understands me. And that starts repairing the relationship. And when you start repairing the relationship, children begin to orient towards wanting a relationship with us, which leads them in a direction of repair and opens their hearts and souls to getting the treatment and the healing they need because they want to be back with us. That captures the essence of crisis chinuch. We're exploiting their process. We're taking advantage of it to heal our relationship. What we're really doing in crisis chinuch is going back to the beginning. We buy them clothing we would never buy them. We go to, the old days it was Blockbuster. I think it's out of business, right? You see how old we are? Blockbuster. Some people don't even know what that is, right? It's like, you're too young. My wife, Sadekis, used to go to Blockbuster and get their kids like loads of videos so they could watch them because that's what they needed. Today they download, whatever they are. When we facilitate that, what we're tuning into what they need to adapt, to survive. When we tune into them, we're not condoning it. Do you understand? Not for 1 second. I never met a kid who said to me, my father changed his shitas and he suddenly holds of pornography. Or my mother thinks that these little dresses are the right thing we should wear. Never heard such a thing. They know. But what they experience is attunement from us, repair in a very fractured relationship with us. And what that facilitates is an internal desire to want to be close to us, to want to reconnect with us, reconnect with our life, reorient towards a life that could be consistent with us. That's a slow process. It's not 3 months like going off. It takes time. And they'll test us on the way. And as we pass each test in crisis chinuch, and we give them what they need, which is adaptive, so they can survive. They fill the hole. That's adaptive. Eventually, they themselves, 9 times out of 10, will move towards recognize, I can't keep living like this. I can't. I'm drunk all the time. I can't keep doing pot. I can't smoke. They come to us eventually, and they ask for support and help to get their lives back. This is crisis chinuch. If we could understand there's no such thing, it's not about rebellion, it's not about a philosophy, it's not about shitas, it's a sugya of trauma. It's a sugya of trauma. And the reason it happens to some of us and not to the neighbors who seem to be yelling and screaming at their kids, more than we do, is because trauma didn't happen to their kids, and it did to ours. And so we have this gift, and we have this job to try and help them come back by utilizing, buy them things, gift them, give them stuff. I mean, my gosh, if I think about the amount of money we spent on our kids, I probably spent $1 million over the years, the last 26 years, just investing in them, just indulging them, buying whatever they need, get them, tune into them when they're younger. When they get older, you should know, they don't take advantage. They don't become indulgent. Do you understand? When they come back online, which is our job, right? Prefrontal cortex, bring them back online. When we bring them back online by creating the safety of healthy attachment, guess what's in the prefrontal cortex? Morality, ethics, attuned communication. It's all there. And it starts happening. And you start watching it and start observing it with your kids, where they begin to get their lives back. This is what crisis chinuch is. Give them, indulge them, connect with them. Don't lose them. Stop with all the stuff that belongs in regular chinuch box. Close that box, bury it somewhere. That's not our box. In our box, we're going to tune into their adaptive needs to survive, and we're going to provide them the music and the movies and the unexpected. And when they want to go to McDonald's, short of putting it in their mouth, which l'chayra in halacha, even I can't find a heter for that. To actually put the McDonald's sandwich in and close their mouth on it. Probably not. But short of that, to go and drop them when they walk in from the outside and you gave them money and they buy it, in severe crisis chinuch, absolutely. We go to these extreme measures because we want to understand it's adaptive. Again, I'm not paskening here. I'm not telling everyone, go home and take your kid to McDonald's. Please do not quote me that I said that. I get in trouble. What I'm saying is, ledugma, litem musagim. It could be that if that's what they want, you take them, you give them money, they're buying it, I'm not buying it. But what I'm buying may be the life of my child by attuning to them, that they feel connected with and understood. I may be saving their life. This is crisis chinuch. This is what we're here for this weekend, to understand in many, many different ways. Let's hope that this whole organization will go out of business. B'karov. Thank you very much.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.